Room Sound's new Kurt Ballou Signature Series Volume 2 is out now. We're going to take a look at this virtual instrument in depth, and I'm also going to share my template. So this loads into Kontakt 6. This paid library will work with the player version of Kontakt. Let's start off with the kit page where we can see an overview of the kit. We can audition any of the drums by just clicking. We can hit this little drop-down menu and try out different toms and different kicks and different snares. So that's the copper, here's the brass, and basalt. With a piece selected, we have options for pitch, sustain, articulation, volumes, and turbo track, which is a specially pre-mixed kind of version of that snare that you can blend in the mixer page. But you just have to activate it here. You can also import a wave sample one shot to blend in. So that's available for the kick, the toms, and the snare. There's not a lot of options for choosing the cymbals, basically one for each, but there are a lot of them. And then for the ride, there's a couple cymbals. All right, so let's go over to the mixer page. We have solo, mute, polarity invert, panning, and volume for every single mic that's on this kit. I've got this set up with the all zero preset, which is basically kind of a flat version of this mix with the room mics at -12. They sound a little weird when they're normalized to the same level as all the other tracks, so just bring them down to a more appropriate kind of ambient level. Below that, we get information about which mic is on each channel here, the position, mic preamp, and then you have the option of choosing a digital recording or an analog tape recording, and you can even set that for every track. So right now I've got the tape version loaded. For the snare top, I've got that turbo track turned all the way down. You can also choose how much bleed of this sound gets into the other mics. It's a great way to really tighten up the drum sound. There's 5 effects slots, and in each of these, I have the signature EQ, which is just an EQ curve from Kurt Ballou that works on all the drums and kind of just gets you a better sound from the start. I would recommend just starting with that. But then there's also low and high cut EQ and different compressors. There's distortion, reverb, stereo widening, and these are basic Kontakt-based effects. So if you've used any Kontakt instruments, most of them have kind of the same effects. But they do have nice interfaces for a lot of them. So if we go to the Brit 4K, they've got this nice custom interface. Go to the FET76, it looks like a 1176. The disto compressor, the Brit 4K bus compressor, these are much more like familiar interfaces, which makes it easier to use. When you're using the stereo presets that come with the drum library, it's very important to check out the master channel effects section, which is at the top of the mixer. And in here, we can change the reverb settings and apply inserts to all the instruments together, or basically the sum of that sound. Again, we have the same Kontakt effects. Right now, I've got a multi-channel setup, so the master channel effects doesn't really have any effect on the stuff because these individual tracks aren't going through the master in Kontakt, but the reverb sends would still be in effect. So if we take the snare top and we want to turn up the reverb, we just grab this slider here, and then that'll come out as a channel in the DAW, Kontakt's master channel. On the MIDI options page, we've got mapping presets, controls for MIDI learn. We see the entire drum mapping, and we can change things by just clicking and then making a selection. Tons of work clearly went into that section here. There's also a groove library. I think because I got an early version of this, I don't have the full MIDI library. But if you click on this Show MIDI File Path button and then add in files to this folder, then they would appear here in this browser as well. You just double click on one of them and then we'll load the file and then you can play it. So let's check out this project. Very simple demo here to show this off. The drum mix is basically flat. There's a little bit of volume adjustments, panning in here. Yeah, there's an EQ, but doing nothing, not even on the right channel. And there's a limiter on the drum bus. Yeah, so let's hear this. All right, so that's the first demo, and I've given you kind of an overview of the instrument. Let's go over to my second demo. And this is, again, a similar setup, multi-channel out, no effects. There's some bus compression on the drum bus, and I got a couple of tracks of guitars. And this time it's baritone guitars instead of normal 6-string electric. As with a lot of their drum libraries, there's a full microphone bleed option that can be disabled, and then it's basically like each instrument individually is recorded rather than with all of the bleed that comes from the other mics. It makes a big difference on the sound, also big performance difference because you're not triggering samples from other drums every time you hit the snare, that sort of thing. But realism is so much better using that. So I'm going to turn it off. So mic bleed off right now. Okay, and I'll turn that on. It used about 150 voices or so, or 150 samples simultaneously playing back. Now I've turned on full microphone bleed, and we'll play that section again. So there it's playing anywhere from 250 to 350 sounds simultaneously. My system can handle it, but that is something that you can go to save some CPU or RAM use depending on your system. Highly recommend leaving that on and maybe just like freezing your drum tracks if needed, but I think it's worth having for that extra realism there. So we've been listening to the analog tape recording for both of these tracks. Just for comparison, I'd like to switch over to the digital mode, and it's going to reload all of the samples, 3.45 gigabytes of samples there loaded up, and let's play this back. Okay, let's go back to the tape for all channels. To me, they both sound great. I think there's a little more like texture on the analog tape version. Bass is a little more full, that sort of thing. But yeah, I'd be happy with both, honestly. Let's talk about Turbo Track. I'm going to solo this kick. So there's the raw kick. Let's bring in the Turbo Track. And I'll solo the Turbo Track. You can use this to add more smack or punch to the drums. Maybe you want to actually go to the sustain section for the kick and tighten up all the kick. And then in the mixer section, you have that long sustain for the Turbo Track. Essentially having a tight, close mic and a processed, long, sustaining one-shot sample. That's a really easy option you can make, and something that can be kind of tricky to do with separate plugins and different samplers and everything triggering all at the same time. So yeah, Turbo Track, pretty cool. You don't get the Turbo Track for every mic, but you have it for the kick in, the snare top, the rack tom, and I'll just enable that for the toms. And then in the mixer page, we can turn that up. I find somewhere like minus 8 to -6 is a good blend for most of these. I went through the effort of setting up a Reaper template for this drum library, and I don't want anyone to have to go through that again, so I'm going to share that. There'll be a link in the description to where you can get that. Let's go through what that actually entails. Once you have that template installed, you'll just right-click, insert track from template. I suggest putting it into an instruments folder like here, and then from here, I'll just choose the Kurt Ballou S2 K6 VST3 Multi. And this should work on Mac and PC, and this is what you'll see. Plugin should come up, and everything is routed. One change I'm going to make, actually, is just inserting that signature EQ on all the channels. It just sounds better, so I think it's worth setting that up. And I will also set up the Turbo Track at a level of like -6 to start, because I just think it sounds better. So all of that will be done for you by the time this video goes live. Each of the drum tracks is routed to a separate output, got mono and stereo outputs already set up, which comes up in Reaper's mixer on separate channels. When you want to record something or program some drums here, you want to use the track just labeled Kontakt. That's where your MIDI items go, or you record arm it and you can play your V drums or drum pads, MIDI keyboard, whatever it is. Then we've got the KT main or reverb track. And so from Kontakt, the default output will come up here. Nothing in here within this drum library will come out of this channel unless you're using the reverb sends built in. And remember that the reverb is set up on the master channel effects. My template's going to start with that empty because I just use my third-party reverbs if I want to add anything here. But yeah, that's why that first channel will come up with no sounds coming out. Then we've got kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, rack tom 1, rack tom 2, floor tom 1, floor tom 2, hats, ride, ORTF, overhead, overhead space pair, near room, mid room, far room, and far room 2. You can arrange these in any order you want. If you want your overheads first, just drag and drop. Once they're routed, the order doesn't matter. So just make that to whatever is comfortable for you. I basically followed what was here in this mixer. with mono channels going to mono tracks, stereo channels going to stereo tracks. Everything is pre-panned, but nothing is adjusted for volumes other than the lowering of the room mics to start with. And then maybe one more small note here. I've actually backed off the level by -6 across the board for each of the outputs. I was just finding that it was a little bit hot coming out in general. So that's taken care of. For additional processing, I'd recommend a bus compressor. I'd also set up maybe parallel compression, 2 or 3 different reverbs that you can send the snare and toms to, maybe a bit of the overheads just to kind of glue everything together. It's a great sounding library. You don't need to do a lot, but in a mix, of course, you need to make it work. Along with this library, there's also several presets. You get 7 presets from different people that work with Kurt Ballou. The same basic drum sounds, but there's a lot of different effects used in the insert section of each drum, as well as on the master section. This first one is bend preset. Pretty good. Here's Dave preset. And most of these are pretty loud. Jason preset. So this one, it's just using the far room and absolutely destroying it with compression. Sounds pretty awesome. Maybe it was a mistake that it was saved solo, but maybe not. Very cool sound. Here's John preset. Very different sound. Mark preset. Todd preset. So this is another great room sound drum library. If you missed any of the previous videos that I've done about the room sound libraries, I'll link to some of them below. Thank you, Room Sound, for sending this over to me. I've been having a lot of fun with it. And if you're interested, links to where you can get this will be down in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Support the Reaper blog through Patreon and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.